Hey, welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Brodinski, and I'm up in back of my house on the Trap Rock Ridge that runs through East Wallingford. But joining me on the screen is Jason Zandri, and I have a feeling he is in his office at home. Jason, welcome back to the Citizen Mike Show.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah, the reason why I'm up here in the Trap Rock Ridge is because I like those storm clouds that sort of forming, above my head. It's sort of a hint as to what's coming up on this episode of the Citizen Mike Show. But I wanted to talk to you. I wanted to talk to you about the kerfluffle, the dust up over the possibility of PCBs in the building the town bought to house the Wallingford Police Department. It's supposed to be their new home, of course, subject to bonding. That's coming up in a meeting, a town council meeting soon. And if you just stand by while I sort of set the table by reading a couple of clips, a couple of sentences from the Record Journal, introduce the topic, and then we'll get into it. This goes back to January 12. And the lead sentence is a town councilor is raising concerns about potential safety hazards at the building set to be renovated into the town's new police station over records indicating that an architect suggested making an environmental report disappear. And that was Republican Craig Fishbein. The article says, this is a quote from Craig at the town council meeting that's reported in the Record Journal article. The architect who made this comment is Brian Humes. That's his name. So Mr. Humes reported, according to Craig, this is Craig talking, Mr. Humes reported that the draft report on PCB testing was released. He said the minutes state. And then the Record Journal goes into some background of what PCBs are. And the way it's written up, they sound really scary. It's a known carcinogen, but if you don't eat it, it may not be. So that's to be developed between you and I in just a couple of minutes. So this again is quoting Craig Fishbein. He said, "It is troubling to learn that a consultant for the town would ever suggest making a report disappear." We're going to explain that in just a couple of minutes what he's talking about. And he put that in an email to the Record Journal. Even more troubling is there is no indication in the minutes of rejection of this proposition by any member of the committee. And therefore, the natural assumption, according to Craig, is there was a general agreement to do so. And then further down in the Record Journal article, Craig Fishbein suggested or hinted that maybe there were clandestine activities going on in the police station steering committee to make a report about PCBs or potential PCBs disappear. So that's how it all began. And before I turn it over to you, Jason, I just want to make a couple of points to help set the table. I want to knock this off right away. In the context of the Wallingford Police Department, the new building, PCBs are not a health concern. They don't create a hazard to anybody unless you eat them. And if you eat them, you might get sick, probably from eating caulk or something rather than PCBs. And so the raising the alarm about sort of a health hazard in a building built in 1978 where PCBs might be in caulk, sort of alarmist and unwarranted. But that's what was done. And then based on, Craig Fishbein's comments in the email that he sent to the Record Journal, based on his comments at the council meeting, the mayor got really agitated, got really irritated, which led to a press conference. We'll show you in a minute. But we got to take things in order. I'm going to stop here, Jason, and get you on. Your reaction so far as to the story insofar as I've developed it. We got a long way to go, but
Sure. So thanks. Yeah. So, I mean, here's the way that you got to look at PCBs, right? You got to look at them almost like lead paint. A lot of times, lead paint may or may not be present in older houses. And there's certain criteria that you need to take to kind of mitigate lead paint. Either you got to remove it all in its entirety, make sure it's not flaking, paint it over. Then when you if it's an apartment or something that you're renting out, You have to make sure that the people coming in understand that there might be the presence of lead paint. No testing is done, or maybe there was testing done, and you meet all the requirements. So that's a key factor here, right? It's if I was a landlord and I had lead paint present and I did a test for it, I shouldn't make the report disappear. I should provide the report, notify and inform the tenant that there is lead paint. It might, there might be the presence of lead paint. The only places it might be is the old windows, and they're painted over. There's no flaking, as you see. You basically address it rather than disappear it. So much to the point that you started to make, and like you said, we're going to build this up as we go along. There is this accusation of a draft report that was to be disappeared, and then it was defended that it didn't exist. But the name of said report is Polychlorinated Biphenyl Survey Building Materials for the Renovation Project, Commercial Office Building, 100 Barnes Road. So there is a draft report.
We'll get to it. We'll get to it. We gotta do this in order. We'll get to it. But at issue in these comments and quotes by Craig Fishbein and the reporting of the Record Journal is this meeting that the steering committee, the police station steering committee, had in October. And what happened at that meeting? And what did the architect say? And how do we know what he said? So what we want to do is really drill down into the primary source of information and establish what exactly happened. And we can do this, and we're going to do it in about 3 minutes. And what exactly happened and what importance should we put on it? So one way of finding out what happened at that meeting where this remark about making a report disappear, one source is the minutes. A better source is an audio tape of the meeting, and audio tapes are taken of many meetings, if not all meetings in the town of Wallingford, as a record of what went on. And very often the recording secretary will listen to the audio in preparing the minutes. Certainly the audio is a help, but we've got the audio of the pertinent portion. So let's start by playing that audio, Jason, and you and I will come back to what we've heard. So here we go. 3, 2, 1, hit it.
All right. I'll call the meeting to order. This is the Thursday, October 13, 2022, Police Station Steering Committee regular meeting. It is 10:10 a.m. And as of right now, committee members present are myself, Allison Kapuscinski, Rich Heidegard, and Bill Wright. We're expecting more soon, so I will try to announce for the record if and when they get here. We can move on to agenda item number 4, update from the design team. Brian?
The third thing that they issued was a draft report on a PCB testing. My recommendation to the town is you don't continue any further PCB testing and just drop the whole topic completely. PCB removal, if you have state or federal money involved, becomes a requirement. You hear it a lot in school construction because of where the funding sources are coming from. But it's not a requirement for the state of Connecticut to do PCB testing for, local projects. It's something that may be present in caulking, and it may then reach into masonry, which means now we have to take masonry away just to do. It's just like a domino effect that you're not required to get into that level of testing. And they did issue it with a draft on it. And my recommendation to the town is you make that disappear. You make that draft report disappear, and you don't continue any further testing for PCBs. And I think that Downs might also concur with that.
Yeah, I'm not as up to speed on the rules and regs, but certainly this is not a school we're building here. That's where it becomes a bigger concern.
Moving on to item 7, discussion regarding results of environmental testing services. The building was already discussed. Were you here for that, John? I don't remember.
No.
So as a basic recap, PCBs are not required to be tested because we are not a state or federally funded project. So instead of spending more town money to do those testing, we're just going to stop with, not testing them.
I apologize to everybody. The audio was not as loud as I would have liked. The setting of this meeting was not in the council chambers where everyone has an individual microphone. So if you have to go back and replay it and turn your volume up louder and louder and louder and get your ear close to the computer, do it. But that is actually what happened and what was said. So Jason, a reaction to that. First, well, let me ask you this. The statement was made clearly by Brian Humes to recommend the report disappear. No doubt about that, right? There's no question, right? There's no denying that he said that.
Let's take it even a step further, because he was very clear in the audio recording to indicate that this was a draft report, because I think there's going to be some maneuvering, if you will. Well, a report was never released, but there was this draft report, right? But he very clearly said in the recording, there is a draft report on PCB testing. They should drop the entire topic, because if you start to go into this and try to do some PCB testing and find out that it leached from an original source, it can get into masonry, and then you have to remove all of that. It becomes a domino effect on what you have to clean up and remediate. And he again mentioned this draft report, and that they should make the draft report disappear. This was very clearly indicated in that recording segment.
Yeah. And so I wonder if there is a reason why, does this report contain such information that would scare people? Or is it really damaging, or would it set the project back? You and I have both looked over that report. My assessment of that report is one page. It's not a report on testing of PCB samples. Samples were never taken. It was really a survey, like he walked around the building and looked at areas where PCBs might be there based on the age of the building. And then he said 2/3 of the way down this one-page report, testing and laboratory analysis to confirm or negate the presence and concentration of PCBs is required for waste characterization. Jason, what's your interpretation of that?
Well, what happens with any renovation project, demolition project, whatever it might be, whether it's PCBs, asbestos, whatever the case might be, if you're doing work and you're going to open up walls, chip paint, remove tiling, if it's an older building, there are certain requirements that you need to kind of review, because all of this stuff, when it's demolished or, again, taken away or carted away, can't all go in the dumpster. Okay. The only way things can safely be put into the dumpster is if they're newer, beyond the late 70s, early 80s, where all of these different types of things were used, PCBs, asbestos, and so forth. Later construction can all be busted up and thrown in a dumpster and hauled away to incinerators and landfills. Anything that's older, you have to basically prove that there is either a marginal amount of contaminants that goes below a certain threshold so that it can be commingled, or if it's too high, you have to separate them. The bad stuff gets handled carefully, and the regular disposal debris can be, quote unquote, tossed in the dumpster. So all that this report is saying is that for waste management purposes, you might need to do this if you're going to start demolishing or doing retrofitting in building sections.
Yeah, so let me give you my, I think we agree, but there might be some differences of emphasis between your view and my view. This is not something that the owner of the property needs to do. This is really something that the demolition contractor may require, because a demolition contractor in hauling away stuff has got to take asbestos containing materials to one location and routine debris to another location.
Correct.
So this is a burden on the demolition contractor. If the demolition contractor doesn't care about PCBs because the building is so old, and the PCBs no longer cause a threat or present a threat, If the demolition contractor doesn't care, the owner doesn't have to care. And in this situation, I understand the whole building is being gutted. They did test for asbestos, fine, and the demolition contractor is going to know about that. And they tested for lead in another report. The demolition guys are going to know about that, and that's wrapped up in the bid. But PCB testing not being required and the demolition contractors apparently not caring, the town really doesn't have to care. Your thoughts on what I just said?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's basically what it's for. This is not necessarily about the police officers being in the building after the fact and being exposed to anything.
Right. So this one-page narrative, just to emphasize, is not a report on PCB samples. It does not indicate that samples were taken. It does not conclude that PCBs were in the caulk around the old windows and doors. It kind of assumes that PCBs could be there because of the age of the building, but it certainly set off no red flags or warning signs that there's a health hazard involved. And that squares exactly what the architect said, and frankly, my general reading and research. So this is sort of an innocuous report, but because PCBs have such an alarming ring to it, and sometimes members of the public get alarmed when they hear about these chemicals when they don't fully understand, what's going on. Maybe the architect said, I don't want to deal with a public relations problem if the word PCBs gets out. Let's just deep six this report. I'm going to go back to you for your reaction to what I just said.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of like saying, I want to unring a bell. Now that there's this draft report out there that basically says, hey, there might be something here based on certain, parameters. Here's the draft report on, what we were retained to do. Environment was retained by the town of Wallingford to perform a survey on PCBs in that building prior to any demolition or renovation. And that's what they did their job. And now this is here. Ding, the bell is rung. Now it's making noise and someone wants to unring the bell and it doesn't happen. You can't make it go away, but it's being attempted.
Yeah. So going back to the meeting, the steering committee meeting where these comments were made, we see that the architect used the word draft report. And I wonder why he said, let's make it disappear, and whether the word draft has anything to do with it. And I'm going to crawl into the architect's head. I'm not defending what he said, but I'm going to crawl into the architect's head speculatively, because I haven't talked to him, and try to figure out why he might have made this horrendous comment, this comment, make it disappear, just poor judgment to say that. But what could he have been thinking? And here's what I think. Under the Freedom of Information Act, public documents have to be disclosed, but there's a bunch of exceptions to that. And one of the exceptions is that if a document or a record is a preliminary draft or a note, preliminary draft, it doesn't have to be disclosed under the Freedom of Information Act. And merely because you put draft on a document, the town says this is a draft, doesn't mean it is a draft. The label is not legally binding on a Freedom of Information Commission or on a court. So putting draft on it doesn't protect the document from public disclosure. It's much more complicated than that. But I think Brian Holmes was thinking, the Freedom of Information Act does have this exception that you can legitimately withhold a public record from disclosure if it is a preliminary draft. I think his mind went there, and the words came out, and they shouldn't have. I'm not trying to defend them, but I think that's some of the background. Your thoughts on what I just said?
Yeah, no, I agree. Listen, I think anybody that has to deal with the public, speak, write a letter to the editor, whatever it might be, once in a while they choose a phrase that, maybe in retrospect they wish they wouldn't have said. They should have put it differently. I think that if he had went about the long explanation, He could have made that point exactly the way that you did, but he said, let's just make it disappear. I mean, we've all done that. Rather than make a long explanation of why we want to get something done and defend it, define it, and then defend it, we say, just make it go away. Or let's not talk about that anymore. But in the context of a comment like that, and then it gets brought up, it's all about how you explain yourself afterwards. If I say something and then it's brought to my attention later that might not have been the best thing to say, and if I could at least get into my head and be open-minded enough and go, yeah, I probably could have been better about that, then I kind of put the thing to rest. But if I double down on the fact that, it should be deep six, getting rid of, if you double down on the bad behavior or the bad way to say it, you make a bad problem worse.
Yeah. I just want to fill in one little gap about this exception to the Freedom of Information Act as to why the legislature, state of Connecticut, made an exception for preliminary drafts. And this is a very rough, coarse layman's explanation. But I think the legislature decided way back when that sometimes preliminary thoughts, trial balloons need to be discussed in a closed room and say, Jason, if we're both in government, Jason, what do you think of this idea? Is this crazy? And I float an idea and I put it in a memo and you say, that's crazy, Mike. That shouldn't go anywhere. That's really nuts. I said, well, here's another idea. Let me float this by you. And I write you a memo and you say, that's even worse. The idea would be that's a preliminary draft. I never intended it to be like my final thinking. My thinking was a work in progress and I'm running this by you. That's an example of what a preliminary draft could be. And something like that, a memo expressing my work in progress, flawed thoughts do not have to be disclosed. So let's move on. Now we have the issue. We know what was said. We know exactly what was said. And there's a big hoopla about the minutes not reflecting what happened at the meeting. Your thoughts on that?
So I found that entire press conference interesting.
Which we haven't got to yet. Remember, we haven't got to yet. We will. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, but I mean, that's where the hoopla went. The hoopla went from the article in the newspaper. So it went from being mentioned at the town council meeting to an article in the newspaper to now the mayor is going to have a press conference about it that basically the press only knows about. A letter is written on a Thursday, probably late in the day, and it's released on a Friday, and very few of us even found out about it upwards of an hour before this actually happened.
Yeah. I reviewed the minutes, and I'm sure you have too, and I compared the minutes. They're online, anyone can get them. Compared the minutes with the audio tape. The minutes are as perfect as they can be. They are as an accurate representation as to what the architect said as you could expect. There is nothing flawed or wrong about the minutes. Any attempt to say that the minutes were not an accurate representation as to what the architect said on these points, any attempt to characterize the minutes as being wrong is wrong. The minutes were great. The minutes were good. The minutes were right. There should be no debate over the minutes, yet there was. The whole dispute started to turn on what the minutes said. So now, Jason, take me to that press conference.
We're here to address serious accusations which impugn the integrity and character of members of our police station steering committee, as well as the experts we've hired to guide us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the members of the building committee. I'm Brian Humes of Jakunski Humes Architects out of Berlin, Connecticut. We have been retained by the town of Wallingford to oversee the architectural and engineering services related to the renovations at 100 Barnes Road for the purposes of a new police facility for the Wallingford Police Department. When the topic came up of testing for hazardous materials within the building, we informed the building committee of the requirement from OSHA for lead testing and asbestos testing. Conversation ensued about other environmental testing that may be done at the facility. One topic involved PCB testing. PCBs may be present in caulking, but the testing of that PCB material is not a requirement. If I can give a little bit more note on PCBs in caulking, PCBs in caulking would not produce any detectable vapors even during removals. The PCBs are very stable oil with an extremely low vapor pressure, which means that they don't evaporate unless they are heated. Any PCBs in caulking would be over 38 years old since the use was banned in 1978, as I mentioned earlier, and anything volatile would be long gone by today. PCBs were used in low concentrations in caulking to provide long-term elasticity and flexibility to the caulking. The PCBs in caulking are an integral part of the polymers used in the caulking, unlike transformers and ballasts where they are liquids and can easily disperse. In order for PCBs in caulking or any other hazardous materials to present an hazard, it would have to be ingested, absorbed through the skin, or inhaled. PCBs are not absorbed through the skin, are very unlikely to be ingested, and could not be inhaled. Unlike liquid PCBs, PCBs in caulking would not present a hazard to the environment since they are not biodegradable. There was some reference in the media about a report that was suggested to disappear. I want to reiterate to everybody that there was no report. There was no testing that was performed. There was no recommendation to perform testing. And there was nothing other than the recommendation not to proceed with testing. There was nothing that was made to disappear. If there was some reference of wording within a meeting minutes, I was never asked about that. Post-publication of those minutes, no one ever contacted me to further identify or understand the phrasing that I utilized. But I assure you that there was nothing that was ever present that was made to disappear. Thank you. I have not read the minutes. I have not seen the minutes.
The problem here is minutes are a summary. Minutes are not quotes. Minutes are a summary. There should have been at least the courtesy to contact members of the committee to find out if there's a problem or not. Instead, the minutes are treated as if they're verbatim comments, and we suddenly have accusations about highly questionable activity related to a number of people here, all of them very qualified, professional people. The problem here is a failure to ask those who are responsible for the project what the truth may be. Were the minutes accurate or not? Instead, we hold accusations sent to the press, we hold press conferences in order to rectify what in the beginning is a problem, and that is not seeking all information before forming conclusions.
So before you interrupted me, what I was going to say, or what I was trying to say is, the minutes reflect exactly what he said.
No, they don't. They are a summary of what occurred at a meeting.
So you're going to go on the record right now saying that on the audio tape, he didn't say that?
No, I'm saying the minutes are a summary. Minutes do not typically quote someone. They are a summary of what the minute taker feels is appropriate for a historic reminder of what occurred at a meeting. They're not a quote. You've just heard the architect say that there was no report. So if something was written in the minutes that some report should disappear, there is no report that could disappear. So something is wrong. Perhaps the minutes were written wrong. I don't have an answer to that, but we have the people here who are entrusted with this project and are dutiful in dealing with it in a responsible and professional way. All I ask is that those who have questions about the project should treat them professionally and talk to them about whether there's a problem or not before concluding there's a problem and having us all then deal with events like this. You would rather trust what the minutes, a summary of the meeting, reflects.
No, that's why I got a copy of the tape. It's in the tape.
But you would rather trust that than what you're being told by the actual people who make the decisions and sit at the meetings. And that's your privilege. If you want to believe a summary of a meeting versus what people are saying as what really happened, I suppose people can do that. But the truth of the matter is it's not a transcript. It is a summary of a meeting. That's the function of minutes. I'm looking at people who have great integrity. We have 3 engineers. We have 2 retired public safety servants, police chief and fire chief. We have a member of the town council who acts as a representative for the town council sitting on this committee, and they are indicating there was no such report. You want to believe what's in a summary in a minutes, and they're saying it doesn't exist. That's your privilege.
Because I was going to ask Mr. Humes, I was going to ask him specifically, and maybe I can ask him now, what did he mean by saying, make the report disappear?
I think he already answered that when he was up here and you asked him.
Well, he said he didn't say it.
Well, you know, we're not going to badger people. He clearly stated what he meant to, what happened. There's no report. Nothing disappeared. We're not going to be able to change that. There is no report. So if the minutes say something different, you'll have to choose. You want to believe a summary of a meeting, or you want to believe the people who are actually entrusted to do the work?
EPA does not currently require that testing, but some municipalities with school renovations elect to test for PCBs.
If minutes say something disappeared, and in fact there is no report that disappeared, no report was ever done, then I guess the minutes are proven wrong. But instead we keep dealing with, oh, well, it said this in the minutes, but we're hearing testimony from the people who are actually involved that whatever was in the minutes was poorly represented because it is not factually true.
And did you read the minutes first before you came in, Mayor? Just yes or no?
You know, I'm not going to debate the minutes with you, Mr. Comerford.
Just please answer the
The
question.
minutes say what they say.
Yeah, and it
the
says
the point of this press conference is to say that the minutes are incorrect. Whatever they lead you to believe seems to be incorrect. The people who are really responsible are telling you the truth. So why we keep debating what's in the minutes, I don't understand. There's a page that deals with PCBs, but there was never any test.
What struck you?
Well, a number of things there struck me really. I mean, the mayor talked about, the mayor led in and, he started to talk about, the testing that was going to be done there, Mr. Hume was talking about, the draft report, and that was the draft report from Enviromed. And that's, in that first segment, there was all about making this report disappear that supposedly wasn't there, but it was in fact there. And they make a reference, Mr. Hume makes this reference about what report, there was no report, and if there was anything in the minutes in there that, he doesn't, he basically made it sound like he didn't know what anybody could possibly be referring to.
Yeah.
And, and then when the mayor took over about 3 minutes into that segment of that recording and suggested that minutes are a summary and minutes are not quotes. Now, oftentimes they're not. We do get summary notes out of a big long meeting, but there are times where they're almost direct quotes. Sometimes they're completely in quotes. And The thing that really struck me at this juncture was the fact that he was talking about these accusations being leveled was not a courtesy to that committee, and that it was, and if there should have been a professional courtesy to contact the members of the committee, and there was no courtesy being given, and they were there to answer questions. But yet, I believe it was Cheryl Ann Tubby who was the recording secretary for this meeting. Now, she is highly regarded and well sought out for a number of different committees in the town, simply because of her thoughtfulness of her job and the way she does it and her attention to detail. And she was spot on with what she recorded off of that recording into the actual minutes, without a doubt. There's if you want to talk about where there was an injustice done, there was far more injustice done to her as a recording secretary and her professional skill level than anything that might have been assumed against that committee. And really the only person that they were doing it against was Mr. Hume.
Yeah. So that first clip had a little bit of the mayor. A lot of it, though, was Brian Hume talking as an architect, explaining that PCBs in this context aren't going to hurt anybody and there's nothing to worry about, which is true. I have no quarrel with that.
Right.
And then when it came down to the comment, did he say make it disappear? What did he mean? Things got kind of vague and kind of evasive. But now we know. I wish I knew more when I went to the press conference. I just didn't have all the information. But now we know the minutes were precise. The recording secretary got it absolutely right. The mayor got it absolutely wrong, because the mayor said the minutes were wrong and the mayor was wrong. And so I guess the crew that was up on the stage sitting by the mayor, I guess maybe they thought that people thought that there was a report that actually tested, a report on tested samples. And I think they imagined the public was thinking, oh, you really did go out and test for PCBs. That was never done. And no one disputes that. But they went on and denied the existence of a report, which tended to confuse more than educate. So, Jason, we've seen 9 minutes of a 45-minute press conference. Knowing now the minutes were accurate, Brian Humes did say make it disappear. We know the report is sort of like a boring kind of a big so what. There's really no there. How would you have handled a press conference if you were mayor, assuming you wanted to hold one? I think the whole thing was a mistake, but he decided to do a press conference because accusations were hinted or actually made. How would you have handled that press conference?
Well, the first thing I would have done is I would have made it a lot more informational than just a press conference, which a lot of times is just designed to have to be almost like a narrative, to kind of, hey, here's our position on this. And if you really get down to brass tacks of a press conference, it's really for the press to ask questions rather than to like inform the public. So I might have made it a broader broadcast, if you will, and invited the press. But I think the way to best approach that would be to identify what the draft report actually was. And that's what we've been talking about this whole time, that it wasn't an output of actual testing. It was an outline, a recommendation of testing based on, if they were going to do any waste disposal. So basically better define what the draft report was. Make sure people understood that the comments being made about getting rid of a report, it was basically talking about making the draft report disappear because it had nothing really to do with any real testing. And then maybe instead of defending it, identifying that was probably not the best way to try to dismiss this report. This meeting here is, we're having this public meeting so that people understand this is a draft report, what it was based on. There was no real testing, and there really wasn't anything here that was going to be inclusive of anything that we would be doing. And so there was really no reason to include it, and basically outline it that way.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think I would approach it along the same lines. I sort of hinted at it a few minutes ago. I think I would have opened up the press conference by saying there may be some confusion in the public caused by a town council, or some confusion about whether or not there are PCBs in this building that we bought and whether or not they're dangerous. So let's put that to bed right now. And then the mayor would explain that in this context, the PCBs are harmless. He would bring Brian Hume up to sort of explain in more technical terms and then put that to bed. And then, the mayor could say, if you believed that there was a report on PCB testing, let's get to that. And here's the report. So you didn't disappear. This is it. And in fact, I have 25 copies over there in the chair. So when you walk out, pick up a copy, and you'll see exactly what we're talking about. And you see it's pretty mundane, pretty boring, and not alarming at all. And it has to do with waste disposal, if it has to do with anything. But that's the report. And it did not disappear, as you can see. And there was no other report ever created. Now, it is troubling that, somebody did make a comment about making a report disappear. I want you all to know that this is not the policy of the town of Wallingford. And we would never tolerate any sort of report disappearing. And I'm asking the law department to send memos out to all stakeholders to remind them of their obligation to preserve, documents, disclose them when required, and remind everybody that if any employee of the town of Wallingford participates in making a document disappear, there'll be the strictest discipline applied. We just do not tolerate that behavior. I would stop and I would go on to compliment the minutes because they're really good. In this case, they were just so perfect. So there are a lot of ways of handling it, and the mayor just certainly just handled it the wrong way and made it worse. He said that the point of the press conference was to show that the minutes were wrong. Well, the minutes are right. He said earlier in this clip that the minutes are proven wrong, but on a closer examination that you and I have done, we've seen the minutes were proven right. So I don't know if this issue is going away, but I think now comes the judgments, or at least my judgment. I'm sure you've got one too. The mayor kind of went off the deep end on this, got too defensive and too emotional, and just wasted, I think, an educational opportunity, just wasted an opportunity to bring the town up to speed and also to establish, an ethical stake in the ground that we don't tolerate, our contractors or our employees saying documents are going to disappear. And Brian Hume would be thrown under the bus a little bit, but he wouldn't have to be at that meeting if he didn't want to be. And frankly, he earned it. He deserved it. I'm sure he regrets saying that. I do think he probably had in the back of his mind this Freedom of Information Act exception for preliminary drafts. Nevertheless, saying what he said, deserves some pushback, which I think we've given. So I want to ask you something that I didn't bring up with you in preparing for the episode. This has come a bit of a surprise, but on that stage, sitting next to the mayor was Vinnie Cervoni, chairman of the Wallingford Town Council. He was not at the steering committee meeting. He was not there to hear this. He did, when the minutes of that October 13 meeting came up for approval at the meeting in November, Vinnie Cervoni abstained because he wasn't at the meeting to compare what actually happened with the minutes. So he abstained. Nevertheless, he was trotted out on the stage as a prop. And if I was him, I'd be furious because Vinnie Cervoni probably knew the minutes were right. And if Vinnie Cervoni was curious, he too would have listened to the audio or checked it out. And I'm just wondering, is he in a bit of a pickle now that he was, trotted out there to support the mayor? The mayor's position was dead flat wrong. Does he just ignore it, or does he distance himself from it in some way?
Well, I only spoke with, Vinnie Cervoni for a couple of minutes after the meeting, so I didn't really get an opportunity to get his opinion or take his pulse, but I can put myself in his shoes and get a feeling for the way that I might have done. And I would have done the same things that you kind of outlined. If I wasn't at a meeting and I had no opportunity to listen or review to the minutes. When the vote comes up, you abstain. I've done that on town council. If I've missed a meeting and they want to, vote in the minutes of the meeting and I haven't reviewed them, I'll abstain. I can't approve minutes of a meeting that I didn't attend and I didn't review. So you did the right thing there.
Yeah, I want to get to, do you just ignore the whole topic going forward, or do you, if asked, do you say, no one should ever say, make a report disappear? I think that was, poorly handled, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think he needs to form his own opinion on that. In other words, like, if he's being said, listen, toe this line, if it was me, I would say, look, I can't toe that line. Unlike the report, that line doesn't exist.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right. I want to run something else by this sort of off the topic of TCBs. The police station price is going way up. It's going to be 36 million or thereabouts after the antenna and the radio system is installed, maybe 37 million. When the council, first approved this concept by agreeing to buy the land, the estimate was 24 million. It goes from 24 million to 36 million. So what are your thoughts on that price increase?
I would need to get a better understanding of exactly why that has changed so radically and drastically. I mean, inflation's gone up about 10%. Maybe you can give it 15 when you consider like an 18-month span of time. Even if you want to push it closer to 20%, because you can say some construction materials, other things cost different disposal, whatever it might be. But to basically go up from 24 to basically 36, you got to remember that a $12 million increase against 24 is 50%. It's a 50% increase. Now I understand that the tower and transmitter were added. They're like an add-on of about $1.5 million that wasn't calculated before. It's even if you want to remove that, it's still like 45% increase and then an add-on of 1.5. The numbers don't match up to what I would consider time over cost changes in pricing. So something else is amiss, if you will, and I think it needs to be reviewed.
Yeah. Well, I guess if we knew then, back in 2021, when we bought the land and approved the money to buy the land and the estimate was 24, if we knew then what we know now, I wonder if any votes were, would have switched. As it now stands, back in 2021, Christina Tata was the only one to vote against the police station. I'm not saying that was the right vote or the wrong vote, but I'm just saying, maybe the basis for all the yes votes was a price of 24, and now it's a 50% increase, nearly that. And I wonder if someone at that time would have said, maybe we ought to discuss other alternatives like a satellite police station or, something else rather than spending 36 million. We'll never know the answer to that question, of course.
Well, I think the worst part about it too is that at the time, if you go back at that time, if we closed on it, or even if we had gone a couple of years ahead of schedule, backed up, 2019 maybe, we're certainly talking about a difference in bond rating of 2.5 then to 4.5 and 5 now.
You mean an interest rate? You mean an interest rate?
Yes, yes. Our bond rating to bond the project out.
Yeah.
The interest rate has changed, and that's not because the town's credit rating is different. It's because the cost of borrowing money has doubled from where it used to be. And this goes back to something I champion about all the time. Nothing is ever cheaper in the future, and borrowing costs generally always go up. So you have a scenario now where things cost more, and now you're going from 2.5% interest to 5%. You've doubled the cost of the loan over the same period of time.
Let's make that the final word. We have run out of time, but thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike Show. We hope to see you back soon. Maybe we can talk about the budget or something like that when the time is right. And I want to thank our viewers for watching the Citizen Mike Show and WPAA. We want to thank them too. They put the Citizen Mike Show up on their TV station weeknights at 9 o'clock. And as we used to say when we were in the studio, if it's 9 at night, it's Citizen Mike. Thanks, Jason. See you next time around. Good night, everybody.
Thanks for having me.